The name of my talk is How WPATH Ends. And the idea here is that the obstacle is the opportunity. So when we think about the things that are getting in the way of us providing the care that people need, rather than the care that they're getting, let's think of that obstacle as the thing that's going to help us to achieve our goal. So why I'm here. This is the first article we published at Public in March. I interviewed Michelle Zishinga. I hope I don't pronounce your name wrong, Michelle, if you're here. I interviewed Michelle and I said, have you ever compared what happened to you? Michelle's a detransitioner from Canada who's sued her medical providers. Have you ever compared what happened to you to past cases of medical mistreatment? Yeah, she said, lobotomies. What stood out for you? I asked. That they went on for so long. I'm here because I don't want them to go on for so long. I don't want these things to go on for so long. So I'm here simply as an accelerant and hopefully as a catalyst in service of everything that you've done. I'm very aware that I'm a latecomer and a newcomer and that everybody in this room knows more about this issue than I do. So just consider me to be your tool to help me to achieve these objectives you've set for yourself. These are my books. In order to write these books, I had to lose 90% of my friends. I really loved my friends, but it was really hard to be friends with me. And so I have an ulterior motive for why I'm here, which is just simply to make friends. I know you laugh, but I'm not kidding. And we need friends. Revolutions are made with friends. We created a taxonomy to try to understand what the hell was going on in general over the last 3 years in particular, you can say the last 30 years. And I read John McWhorter's book called Woke Racism. It came out right when San Francisco came out. And in the book he argues that wokeism is a religion and that the ways that people think about race has become a religion. And I was so struck by this, I just pulled out my notebook and I wrote down on the left-hand side just some kind of woke categories, and across the top I wrote some religious categories. Not a scholar of religion. I don't claim that these are the right categories, but it was amazing how easy it was to fill out all of these different categories. The original sin, guilty devils, the myths, the sacred victims, the elect, supernatural beliefs, taboo facts. You can find this by Googling it. I won't go through all the details of it, but it helped us to orient ourselves to thinking about these problems as having an underlying driver, which is, we think, the nihilism resulting from the secularization, the loss of a traditional belief structure, and the need for a new one. The issue I know the best is climate change. The story basically follows the Judeo-Christian story almost exactly. We were in harmony with nature. We ate from the fruit of knowledge, which was fossil fuels or modern agriculture, depending on what you're talking about. God is angry, he's extracting revenge on us. There's really no redemption in the story, but you can't avoid apocalypse by reharmonizing with nature. There's a power move here in terms of where authority goes. You have a new set of priests and a new set of witches. Same thing with race, it's a new moral order. These three, I think, foundational woke ideologies provide the core theology. So there's a similar story, guilt from original sin, there's no redemption, a new set of victims and a new set of witches. And with trans, we see something similar. I owe my friend Abigail Schreier her insight that gender is sort of a new soul. It's something that exists in transcendent form, that exists outside of the body, and the body needs to be transformed to harmonize with the soul. Language is extremely important. And like a lot of these ideologies, it's actually enacting the opposite of what it says it's concerned about. It says it's concerned about conversion therapy, it's engaging in conversions, and there's a whole new set of witches, all of whom are in the room right now. Sign me up for Team Turf. We see rising psychopathologies in the culture. It's not unique to this issue. particularly cluster B personality disorders. We think there's good evidence that they're becoming stronger in the culture as a whole. Cluster B characteristics, some people think there's ostensibly there's 4 of them: psychopathy, borderline, histrionic, narcissism. Some people think they're all just a kind of, they're all a similar set of traits. Entitlement and grandiosity, dichotomous thinking, black and white thinking, obsessive attention seeking, impaired reality testing, gaslighting. If you're not in your head, then I think you've seen some of this in the issues that you've been dealing with. We see, particularly in the trans movement, I'm shocked by the levels of antisocial behavior or psychopathy that we see. And Sam Vaknin writes, the potential for aggression and victimhood movements is much larger than in the general population. Anything that's grievance-based leads to violence and death. This was from a sign in London a few weeks ago. Respect trans people, or your pronouns will be was, were. Just to be clear, that's a death threat. And I'm a huge advocate of free expression and the First Amendment. We have very few restrictions on free speech, but one of them is immediate incitement to violence. That is illegal. I'm not allowed to threaten you with death. We're not allowed to say, we allow neo-Nazis to march through neighborhoods of Holocaust survivors, incredibly. Most people don't realize that. But we don't allow them to threaten people with death. That's where we draw the line. That's where the Supreme Court draws the line. I, like all of you, was very moved when Kelly J. Keane showed up in New Zealand and she was assaulted. And there was signs that explicitly called for violence. The idea that there's a genocide going on all feels very, inflammatory feels like an understatement. But this is what's striking to me as an outsider to this movement is the levels of violence. I don't see that as much in the climate change movement. We saw some of it in Black Lives Matter, but it's quite striking and it's quite frightening. And I've never been at a conference where I had to go through security in the way we did here today. So first of all, thank you all. You're all very brave just for being here, and deep respect for what you guys have done and for the organizers of this conference. It's really quite remarkable. Yeah. So this is just to get a better picture of it, antisocial. We renamed it, due to the euphemistic treadmill. It's probably not nice to say it's psychotic, so now we say antisocial personality disorder. But we see these are the characteristics. This is drawn from the Mayo Clinic summary of what you see in antisocial personality behavior. You see these behaviors a lot in the trans movement. And we saw them. We wrote a piece called Why Trans Activists Attack Women after the Riley Gaines was held hostage basically in a room in San Francisco State University. The president of the university never apologized for this. It's really quite extraordinary. So these disorders and these inappropriate behaviors are not just in the activists, but they're actually enabled by the leaders of these institutions. We felt like this was significant enough that we needed another taxonomy, and so Peter Boghossian and I created another taxonomy. This is, we'll release this publicly. We've had it behind a paywall, but we'll release it publicly this week. And you can see we just took the cluster B personality disorders and we put them across the top, and we reduced the woke ideologies to just race, climate change, and trans. The first major finding in doing this exercise was just that trans is the craziest one of these ideologies. I think climate change is real. People call me a climate denier because I don't think it's the end of the world, but I think climate change is real. I think we should do something about it. That's why I'm an advocate of natural gas and nuclear power. Racism, thank you. I'm upset by the levels of climate alarmism because they do create all sorts of problems, including the depriving of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia of cheap energy and the creation of anxiety disorders among adolescents. I also think racism is real, and I'm against it. And I know it's a controversial position. Trans is just different. I mean, there's just two sexes, and you can't change someone's sex. And this just seems obvious, but it's obviously not. And so we're deep into what the psychologists and psychiatrists call impaired reality testing. There's also lots of, you all know it, the attention-seeking, the grandiosity, the emotional dysregulation. It's the excess of empathy for people designated victims. It's the lack of empathy for people designated oppressors, people like Riley Gaines, J.K. Rowling. And then the splitting is the black and white thinking, you're either with us or you're against us. So the obstacle, in my view, are liberals and Democrats. And you could say the media, but that's the same thing. This is a tribe of people I'm very familiar with. I come from this tribe of people known as progressives. In fact, I come from the radical left, or at least the liberal left. I literally summer on Martha's Vineyard. So I go native every summer just to get myself familiar with the unique practices of this group. You spend a few hours on a sailboat with wealthy liberals, and you learn how they think about things. And I also am an ethnographer of my family. And this is the main thing that you hear, is that those are outliers. What you're describing, you're exaggerating. I've had some interactions with a detransitioner who has gone on and off Twitter to share his story as a young gay man who had full bottom surgery and is now deeply in regret about it and is suffering very much. And I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for this person. And I described this young man's trauma for my family, and it was like denial. It was just Mike, Mike, you're just doing, what they wanted to know was whether I was going to be nice to the college-age friend of theirs who was non-binary. That's what they wanted. Was I going to be rude or nice to that young man? That was really what they were concerned about. And it was like there was so much intense energy behind it that I could tell it was a kind of displacement, which is when you have a lot of cognitive dissonance and anxiety related to being confronted with something really pretty serious and awful by somebody you're close to. And I should say these are my family members know that I've been pro-gay my entire life. I married 2 gay men in my living room with great pride. I have had close family and friends who were lesbians in college. Some people very, very close to me. I love the lesbian, gay, and bisexual movement. I always have. I have a huge amount. I worked for a major LGBT organization called Horizon Foundation in the 1990s. Helped to lead a campaign to get to cancel Dr. Laura. This was before anybody knew the words cancel culture. I have a strong and long record supporting gay rights, so my family all knows this, but they were very distressed that I might not refer to a non-binary college-age student. I don't think that's actually what they were distressed about. I think they were distressed about what I was telling them about what had happened to this young man and his deep distress that he was just a young gay man, a young femme gay man. That's all he was. And the homophobic relatives in his family persuaded him to engage in full bottom surgery. And now he's really, really suffering, and we're having a hard time staying in touch with him. I shared this story from my heart with my family. They couldn't deal with it. Now, I think there's some reaction to this. You say, well, maybe you got to be nicer about it, or you've got to, I just think that you have to present them with the evidence. In my experience on these issues, it just takes some time, but we used to perform lobotomies on people, with an ice pick through the eye. We did that. They're known as psychosurgeries. And they went on for too darn long. And these surgeries do not need to keep going on. And we can accelerate the path of ending this process. And so what is the opportunity? Well, it's the same thing as the obstacle. It's liberals. Just in a word, it's the New York Times, it's Martha's Vineyard. You know who I'm talking about. All of you, many of you are liberals, or you're refugees, like me. You start to wonder, right? You start to have political identity dysphoria, and You go to conferences like the one I went to in London, and you're like, am I a conservative? Maybe I am a conservative. And then you hang out with conservatives for 3 days, and you go, wow, no, not at all. Not at all. I think same-sex marriages are wonderful, for example. So you realize, we are refugees, and that's okay. And so we're in a unique position of being able to talk to our fellow liberals, of which I am still one. I'm a liberal in my love and my compassion for the vulnerable. As I say, I'm a libertarian in my love of freedom, and I'm a conservative, and I believe in civilization. And civilization is supposed to protect the vulnerable, and civilization is obviously failing because we're letting people suffering from well-diagnosed psychiatric disorders like addiction die on the streets at a rate of 2 to 10 a day in major cities in America for absolutely no reason other than ideological reasons. And we're allowing people suffer. We're actually giving people gender dysphoria. It's not. I don't think it's a natural thing. We're creating through ideological means gender and social media gender dysphoria, and then we're mistreating it. And so civilization is a failures of civilization. Ultimately, these are ideologically driven failures of civilization. So this is a straightforward problem in a sense, which is that, we know from Jonathan Haidt that liberals and progressives orient centrally around the core value of compassion. He identifies 6 or 7, they keep changing the number, core values to people. And what they find is that progressives, partly through secularization, that they move away from the emphasis on a balanced set of values towards a really intensive focus on a single value of compassion. That then creates this really powerful blind spot. The blind spot is that compassion could create cruelty. My book, San Francisco, is about that phenomenon. In the name of compassion, we let people suffering mental illness and drug addiction die on the streets, be sexually assaulted on the streets. That's what San Francisco is about. So when I read Abigail Schreier's book and she was describing, she said, gender dysphoria is the only psychiatric disorder that's affirmed medically. I thought, no, you're wrong about this. I've got another one. It's addiction. I'm actually working on an essay right now called Why Progressives Affirm Psychiatric Disorders. And it's about addiction, gender dysphoria, and climate anxiety, and why that is. In fact, that was the subject of my 3rd book, which I abandoned because I'm just tired. And I wanted to publish as a journalist on our Substack, which is what we've been doing. So the strategy, I think, is very straightforward here. It's just to explain to progressives and liberals that these policies are not compassionate. That's it. This is not okay to do this. And when they say, no, you're exaggerating, whatever, we just say, even one case like this is too many cases. That's all. We don't need to get into debate about how, we can show them how many people it is. They'll be shocked by how many people are impacted by these medical malpractice. But we can just say even one child is too many to allow this to occur to. My friend, this young man we've gotten to know, that should not happen to anybody. There's no reason for that to happen. That's all we need to say. And when you say this is wrong, this is a moral issue, this is not sort of an abstract academic question, is that these are real people's lives. And when you meet detransitioners, it changes you, it affects you. So we have, unbeknownst to Stella, when she invited me, she thought maybe I was going to talk about censorship, which we can talk about in the Q&A, but I'm very happy to announce that a very brave person had collected a number of internal conversations within WPATH and shared them with us. And so we are going to release the WPATH files. The person who deserves 90% of the credit for this doesn't like to speak in public, but I'm going to make her stand up and wave her hand so you'll recognize her. It's Mia Ashton. Mia Ashton's tweet threads had gone viral. I found them absolutely brilliant and extraordinary, and I thought to myself, this is a person that needs a bigger platform. And so we scooped her up and we brought her to Public, which is our Substack publication. These files came into our hands, and I'm very grateful to the person or persons whose identities I will go to prison to protect. And that they gave these files to us. If you have other files, other WPATH files, we would welcome them. We're looking to have maximum impact on the release of the WPATH files. I have some experience releasing files on Twitter. This is called the WPATH files. These are, the subtitle is Pseudoscientific Surgical and Hormonal Experiments on People with Psychiatric Disorders. We can unpack this. It's a simple, very simple argument. It'll be a report. We tried to write these as articles for public and struggled with it. It just was there was too much in them. So I have a nonprofit organization as well called Environmental Progress. And we decided to move Mia and this project to Environmental Progress because it required more like a think tank report. And so I'm very happy to say I recently, this was a piece that Mia had been laboring over with some of my colleagues for a very long time. I read it, and I still have, there's still the trans shock factor, which for me is not in anything else I've ever worked on, which is, I also read Kara Dansky's book on the way out here, and it's just, I have to put the material down for a little bit. It's just still so shocking for me to read it. And I put Mia's report down. I was shocked by it. I was sort of recovering. And then I thought to myself, this is the end of WPATH. This is not an organization that will be able to exist. Yeah. No, truly, this is not an organization that can exist anymore. I mean, maybe there's some good people there. Maybe there's some good work that WPATH does. But the organization, it needs to shut down. And if there's some gender medicine that's positive, and I think you all are the experts in it, and Sellers obviously has the report on it. If there's something that's good to come out of it, then it needs to be reconstituted in a new organization, because WPATH has violated the public's trust. And I say this as an absolutely non-expert, truly. All I've done is read your works and your books. That's all interviewed some people, that's all my expertise in it. As an outsider reading these WPATH files, it's so shocking. It feels like watching a David Cronenberg movie. It's like that, except for worse. Not just because it's real, but because if you did it in a film, I don't know that people would believe it. It's just really too much. There's just two arguments that the report makes. The first is that what is going on at WPATH is not science, by any definition of the term of science, not at all. And the second is that it's not medicine. And by medicine, we just mean something that follows the Hippocratic Oath. These are activities that are clearly causing harm. So I am going to show some of them. They won't be live streamed. I don't want to completely spoil the launch of the WPATH files, which will occur sometime before the end of the year. I would ask that you just please don't take photos with your phones. I'll go through some of the material though, and we haven't entirely figured out how to release these reports, but what we would like is for everybody to take it seriously. And by when I say everybody, I mean the New York Times, I mean the Guardian, I mean the people that think that everybody in this room is a transphobe, wrongly. And so we're very open to taking these files to people that will deal with them seriously. But we are going to release them on Twitter so that because these belong to the world. They do not belong behind a paywall. And so we will release them to the world. We will release our report and we will release this on Twitter. And if you're interested, if you're somebody who can persuasively convince us that you could take this to the New York Times or take this to the Los Angeles Times or take this to the Guardian or the Wall Street Journal, we're very open to providing these files to you in advance so you may have that conversation about these documents under embargo, which I trust those, even though I don't trust those newspapers to cover this issue accurately, I do trust that they respect basic journalistic convention of embargo. So I'll walk through some of this so you can see it, but please just don't take photos with your phones, and we are going to we may redact more names. There's a whole ethical conversation about whose names should be redacted. This is the table of contents. Mia has written a history of transgender medicine. She's laid out the argument, and as you can see, it's been two arguments here. WPATH is not a scientific group. WPATH is not a medical group. You can see she goes through this in very systematic way, analytically, written in as much as she could in neutral point of view language. and describes the problems that she's identified. Sections 3 and 4, WPATH has no respect for medical ethics. There's nothing approaching informed consent. And to call these experiments is actually not accurate. Experiments imply you have a control group, you have IRB approval. They imply a whole discipline that is not present here. So I'm not quite sure what to call these, but experiments is probably too generous. And then at the end, in recognition of Michelle's wonderful insight, we compare what we see here to lobotomies, ovurotomies, boy, how am I going to say this one? Abdominophilia, which is the subject is the amputations, the subject of one of Mia's great viral Twitter threads, and then engineering children's height with hormones. This is from her report. Bowers is aware that gender-affirming healthcare providers are robbing young natal males of their ability to orgasm, and therefore their future ability to form long-term intimate relationships, which is an essential part of a fulfilling and happy life for most people. What's more, gender-affirming doctors are choosing this drastic medical intervention as the first line of treatment for this vulnerable cohort of young people while ignoring the scientific literature that shows most children would overcome their dysphoria if allowed to grow and develop naturally without medical intervention. So we see mental illness in these documents, shocking. This is serious mental illness, and we just see people spitballing about this without any sense of standards or rigor in how they're doing this. Arbitrary medical practices, experimentations, it's consumer-driven, it's pseudoscientific. This is from somebody whose name I don't want to say on for the live stream, and it may or may not be redacted. I have several trans clients with serious mental illness, bipolar disorder, and autism, schizoaffective disorder. Even though these clients have a well-established transgender identity, their likely stability post-initiation of HRT or surgery is difficult to predict. What criteria do other people use to determine whether or not they can write a letter supporting surgical transition for this population? Later, we see in the conversations a sense of outrage that people should have to have letters to justify these surgeries. How dare people require that we have letters? I have a patient who's choosing not to change clothes, has not showered, and has worn the same clothing since a follow-up nearly a month ago. I'm not sure if this is due to dysmorphia, but it may well be. She's also failing to shave her face, and now has a quite lengthy beard. This is her first month of HRT. Has anyone else experienced this or have suggestions? This is like a chat forum about what to do with people's bodies and their care. I've never seen anything like this. Trauma is common among trans clients. Nevertheless, I was surprised to find that several of my clients met criteria for dissociative disorders, primarily OSDD. I was wondering if other people have noticed incidents of OSDD and DID among their trans clients, whether there's been any difficulty with their system agreeing to transitioning medically, especially given that not all the alters have the same gender identity. That's just one. You could do a whole report on this single. What's going on here? I'm sorry, guys, I'm going to have to go faster. I had a patient who became dangerous, threatening to our care team post-op, which ultimately ended in a restraining order. This patient had undiagnosed mood disorders that did not surface until post-op, after which she traveled around the country to find other surgeons to provide care. I mean, that one sentence, right? As a surgeon, I never want to violate a patient's rights or impede care in any way, but I also want to make my fellow surgeons aware of this past history. This is the level of systematic care in our country for people with serious mental illness. Sorry, I have too many of these to go through, and I want to make sure there's time for conversation. A recent personality test suggested schizoatypical traits. What are we doing here? Side effects. Hi. Wondering if anyone has had to navigate the development of hepatic adenomas in young person treated with testosterone and oral contraceptives. Without getting into too many patient-specific details, our team has a 16-year-old who was on boy, this is where I'm just out of my depths, who was on norethindrone acetate for several years for menstrual suppression and who has been on testosterone for slightly over 1 year. They found 2 liver masses, hepatic adenomas, and the oncologists and surgeons have both indicated the likely offending agents are the hormones. I have a transition friend who developed hepatocarcinomas. To the best of my knowledge, it was linked to his hormonal treatment. There is some peer-reviewed science that was shared in the forum on this. This is not science. This is Mia. WPATH has broken the chain of trust. WPATH claims to be the source of all knowledge about gender-affirming care, but the scientific basis for the recommendations is non-existent. However, due to its outward appearance as a professional medical association complete with a peer-reviewed journal and a bibliography, the wider medical community places its trust in WPATH. All of you know that AAP and APA, Endocrine Society, AMA, all depend on WPATH. So when WPATH ends, the basis for these medical mistreatments must come to an end as well. Major depressive disorders, PTSD, homeless. More and more patients requesting non-standard procedures such as top surgery without nipples, nullification, and a phallus-preserving vaginoplasty. Lack of consent. I'm just going to move on so we can go a little faster. You can see these are my notes and my exclamation points. It would be great if every patient could be perfectly cleared prior to every surgical intervention. But at the end of the day, it is a risk-benefit decision between you, the patient, the surgeon, and any other resources family you can recruit to help promote the best outcome for the person in question. I mean, this is just making shit up as you go along. I mean, that's all this is. Kids. There's evidence in the files that WPATH members endorse allowing minors to consent to harmful hormone therapy that destroys their fertility and sexual function, as well as surgeries such as bilateral mastectomies and vaginoplasty that will have a dramatic impact on their function as adults. I've recently received questions from an AFAB premenarche 10-year-old patient about whether blockers will stunt his growth. 10 years old, guys. I'm writing for a letter for a 17-year-old gender-affirming top surgery. Their mother reported to me that the surgeon's office is requesting 2 letters. Seems like extra gatekeeping. I mean, 2 letters, right? It's just a mastectomy. It's just a top surgery. It just absolutely seems like extra gatekeeping affirms another person here. I mean, imagine 2 whole letters. What a burden. We have a patient, 17 years old, female to male, that just graduated from high school and has decided to detransition. We have seen him for years, followed all the guidelines. He's legally changed his name and gender and has been on testosterone for 2+ years. He's very distraught and angry. He reports that he feels he was brainwashed and is upset by the permanent changes to his body. Doesn't trust the therapeutic process. You think? So this is the plan as we have it. Release this report sometime next month. We will consider taking it to other journals. We want to be very open. The Twitter files, we learned that we were constrained in terms of the requirements that it be on Twitter first, but I think the arrogance of the mainstream news media meant that they didn't properly cover it. We don't want that to be the case here. We will allow mainstream news media to look at this. That means that some of them will miscover it. That's okay. We're open to having this. People need to read these files. If you read the files and you disagree with Mia's analysis, fine, great. New York Times wants to write an op-ed attacking us as transphobes, that's fine. But we would like for them to have the time with the files and sit with it and really ask yourself, does this look like science to you, New York Times? Does this look like medicine? Doesn't look like it to me. Doesn't look like a non-expert. I don't think that for your average American reading these files, they're going to think that this is a legitimate medical or scientific organization. I think the other thing that we need to do, I know there's been wonderful statements done, huge amounts of work, and we want to, again, build on that. But we do feel like we need a really focused letter on this issue of kids getting these mistreatments. We need all of our liberal and progressive friends to sign it. The Steven Pinkers, the Jonathan Haidts, the John McWhorters, the John Cleeses, who signed our Westminster Declaration on Censorship, people that are liberals, progressives, broadly center-left, sign this letter and say, look, this is not okay. We've read the WPATH files. This needs to change. I think we need that letter to come out sometime early next year. And then we need to go to Democratic leaders and say, are you on board with this, or do you want to pause or ban these surgeries and drugs? Get on one side or the other. You want to be president of the United States, Gavin Newsom? He banned the child kidnapping law that passed out of the California legislature. Thank God for politics, right? Because if he weren't so politically ambitious, then he might have signed it. Seriously. So we need Gavin Newsom to explain to Iowa caucus goers why he supports genital surgeries and drugs for kids, and why he supports WPATH, which is not a scientific or medical organization. I'd like to see him explain that to corn farmers, Democratic caucus goers in Iowa. I think he'll struggle. And I know this because I was raised an hour from here, and everybody in my hometown, all my liberal friends, they all watch MSNBC all day long. And when I sit down with them and I go, yeah, I'm totally fine with non-binary. You call yourself what you want. I respect that. The kids and the puberty blockers, though, I don't know about that. And you know what they say? They go, oh, thank God you said that. I've been wondering that too. I think that's what happens. And I think it will happen quickly now. I think we're at the point, I think the fact that I'm here, an outsider, you've reached a point in this movement where those of us that do not really have skin in the game are absolutely appalled. And when it comes time to make a decision, a moral decision, we know which side we're going to fall on. We know where we want to stand when people say, what the hell was going on? Why did it take so long to ban lobotomies? Thank you very much. Do I still get my 6 minutes and 50 seconds for questions, for Q&A, or take some Q&A? And there are many more files than that, be assured. More than you will want to read in the report.
I'm curious about the New York Times and whether or not there's going to be any responsibility assigned to them for their, at the very least, complicity in what's happened.
Yeah, I'm not an expert, and it's hard to predict, but I was struck that one of I believe the inventor of lobotomies won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. Am I right about that? And I believe that after they banned them, he traveled around the country defending his legacy, full of that crazy cognitive dissonance. So I know from talking to some of you that we really want the people that have done this to take responsibility. And I'm interested in that conversation. And the New York Times is at the top of that list, absolutely. I do think we need, for me, I'll say, and my colleagues, we want to focus. We need to end these practices as quickly as possible. And so we need to, I think it's Lao Tzu or Sun Tzu, I can't remember which one, who says, build the golden bridge for your opponents to walk across, as awful as that may be. So I'm not going to offer the New York Times an exclusive, but I think if there's some reporters there that are willing to take this seriously, we should give this to them and allow them to have the time with it and do the proper reporting, knowing that everybody else is going to be reporting on it too. And everyone else is going to be able to see what the New York Times reporters see. And if the New York Times wants to go and suggest that this is good medicine and good science, that's on their credibility. I think they'll suffer for it.
Great. Thanks for being here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great talk. Thanks for being here. Do you want to talk, or can you comment on the financial implications of the culpability in this movement from the medical professionals, drug companies, hospitals, et cetera?
Well, let me just say first, I hope the detransitioners become millionaires, like absolute millionaires. you know, quite literally the least we could do for detransitioners. And it's actually not nearly enough, and we shouldn't be satisfied with that. But yeah, I mean, we need to bankrupt the companies and the institutions that did this. There's no doubt about it. Obviously, there's many lawsuits already underway. We hope that this will help create a cultural context for those lawsuits to proceed. We haven't done the investigative work yet on the particular financial drivers of this. I've seen some of the reporting out there to date. I know that Gilead has funded a significant amount of trans promotion around the country. I'm eager to dig into it. For us, establishing that this is not science and that this is not medicine and that it's causing real harm is really the first step to being able to do a whole set of other things. But I am interested in that story and would like to investigate it.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm to your right, Mr. Shellenberger.
Sorry.
That's okay. Even further.
Hi.
Hi. There are tens or even hundreds of thousands of people around the world who have medicalized because they were given assurances by WPATH that it was going to help their mental health and help them become their real selves. When this hits, and it hits the mainstream media, a lot of them are not going to want to believe the truth of this. So I want to ask you, how do we help people who have been harmed by WPATH and its members to understand the impact that it has on them personally? How do we reach them?
It's a really great question. In my experience, it's very hard for people not to become defensive when presented with this. So to some extent, I think we're really limited on what we can do. I think it is important to say things like people were misled, people didn't understand, many people did the best that they could, many people's hearts were in the right places. It's anything we can to kind of try to diffuse the anger. I think particularly, it may not be possible, but I think to kind of get people off the defensive is good. To express our own goodwill is important, to express our own values and our own concern. That's why I try to start my talks by explaining why I'm here, why I'm doing this, why I care. Those are all good strategies, but they're limited, and some people are going to react with a lot of cognitive dissonance and distress and anger. And I think my experience is that often when people are in that state, it's best to just disengage, you know. And then I think there's also people that are really clearly cluster B people, high on cluster B spectrum, who it's best to disengage. It's taken me like 30 years of my professional life to learn that really you can't win an argument with a narcissist or people that are high on antisocial personality disorder. You just have to disengage to some extent. So just, I would say, pick your battles. You know, I think I think this is a moment that requires all of us to go to the next level in our own personal development and leadership. And so to the extent to which we can, you know, be a calming force when there's a lot of heat and get people focused on the evidence. I think this is something that this needs to be coolly analytical and fact-based. You know, and I want to get everybody focused on the WPATH files for as long as it takes to really comprehend what's in them.
Hi. Okay. So, I'm a parent, so I'm not in this for myself financially, but I'm also a lawyer. In some of the lawsuits, you talk about making them millionaires. Some of them require that the lawsuits be filed before the information is published. So I would ask that perhaps you let some lawyers look at this, or I could talk to you about why that's the case. Excuse me, I'm nervous, but it's, you are the way that this is going to end. Reporting on this, all the parents, everybody here is the way that's going to end. But until the financial incentives end, and until the people harmed get the money, it's not going to end. So I would just inform you of that and ask you to take it into consideration.
Thank you for saying that, and please know that we have already started that process, and that's of absolute importance to us.
On? Oh, little delay there. Sorry. Hi, I'm over here.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Hi, I've been watching this stuff for years, and everything that you put up here is not new. In fact, Fourth Wave Now has been talking about this. A lot of other people are aware of this. And when I first started watching this, like years ago, I really thought that the health professions would care about the sort of trail of damage. And what I discovered is that I see no evidence of that. So you're going to come up against the suicide narrative, the morally acceptable collateral damage narrative, and the human right to transition narrative. So since people have actually known about this for a while, I think wider exposure will really help, but I'm skeptical against those three things that I listed that they're going to care in terms of those other three things. The suicide thing can kind of be taken apart with some of the research. The other two are more spiritual framings, like the right to transition, and that anyone who's harmed by this is just sort of pawns lost to the game.
I think you raised such a good point. You know, particularly when you look at sort of how lobotomies ended or other awful medical mistreatments, they really had to be, the public had to become concerned about it, and the policymakers had to put an end to it because the medical professions had become so corrupted that they allowed this. So I think what we're talking about here is making this something that the public has to deal with in the ways that I need my liberal family members to deal with it. Hey, we're not talking about what pronoun to use for your friends. I'm talking about these kids are being harmed right now. Where do you stand on this issue? And I just want to focus the ordinary members of the public with it and get this out there so that people who are running for president, who are governors of major liberal states, because the Republican states are just sort of, it's happening, right? Like, conservatives are fine. Like, we're really talking about reaching liberals and progressives and Democrats, and I feel like this should, in my view, help to do that. Thank you guys very much. Thank you. Thank you guys very much.